There's a strange kind of quiet that can settle into a life that is technically working. Not silence, not emptiness, something subtler than that. The noise of obligations continues, responsibilities are met, conversations happen. On the surface, nothing appears broken, and yet inside, something has gone still. It's unsettling precisely because it doesn't announce itself as pain. There is no clear sadness to point to, no dramatic dissatisfaction, just a sense of absence, as if you are present for your life, but not fully inside it, as if you are performing the motions of living while watching yourself do it from a slight distance. Most people don't notice this right away. It hides well inside functionality. You get up, you do what needs to be done. You respond appropriately. From the outside, you look fine, capable, stable, maybe even successful. But there is a dullness underneath the movement, a quiet disengagement that doesn't interfere with performance, only with meaning. This is why it's so easy to dismiss. You tell yourself there's nothing to complain about, that this is just adulthood, that this is how life feels once the chaos settles. You assume the absence of intensity is maturity, or peace, or gratitude done wrong. But it doesn't feel like peace. Peace has weight to it, presence. This feels thinner, like your attention is no longer fully attached to what you're doing. You might notice it in small ways, finishing tasks without feeling anything afterward, reaching milestones that should feel satisfying and registering them almost intellectually, laughing at the right moments without feeling connected to the laughter itself. The unsettling part isn't that life is hard, it's that life is running, and you're not sure you're in the driver's seat anymore. It's like driving for miles and suddenly realizing you don't remember the road you just took. The car moved, you arrived, but your awareness was elsewhere. And now that you've noticed, you can't quite unnotice it. This doesn't happen because something went wrong overnight. It happens slowly, gradually, through comfort. Stability is usually treated as the goal, something to protect, something to be grateful for. And often it is. But there is a version of stability that doesn't feel safe. It feels sedating, predictable in a way that removes choice without asking permission. The fear here isn't of instability. It's of questioning a life that appears to be working. There's an unspoken rule that says if things look good, you shouldn't look too closely. That doubt, in this context, is ingratitude. That curiosity is risk. So you stay still, not because you're content, but because nothing is obviously wrong enough to justify movement. The brain prefers this more than we like to admit. Familiar discomfort feels safer than uncertain freedom, even when the discomfort is subtle, even when it shows up as numbness instead of pain. The nervous system knows what to expect here. It can operate on autopilot. But autopilot comes at a cost. Over time, predictability can quietly remove your sense of authorship. Decisions keep happening, but they feel inherited rather than chosen. Days pass, but they don't feel distinctly yours. You're not trapped, you're just carried. Like water heating gradually on a stove. No single moment feels alarming. Nothing crosses a clear threshold. Until suddenly, something reaches a boil and you can't explain how it got there. Often, the first real crack appears not as rebellion, but as grief. A quiet grief. Not for something you lost, but for something you never consciously chose. You begin to sense that many of the major turns in your life didn't originate from a clear inner yes. They came from momentum, from expectation, from adaptation. This is where the realization stings, not because you were deceived, but because you cooperated without noticing. Carl Jung used the word persona to describe the social mask we learn to wear, the role that helps us function, belong, succeed. The problem isn't the persona itself. The problem arises when the mask stays on so long that the self underneath goes quiet. At some point, "this is who I am" subtly replaces "this is who I learned to be." And the difference between those two is enormous. Awareness of this hurts more than the illusion ever did. Illusion is comfortable because it doesn't ask questions. Awareness restores agency, but it also removes excuses. You can't unknow what you've seen. It's like realizing you've been playing a role for so long that you forgot there was an actor underneath. And now, suddenly, you feel them. Not loudly, just enough to be uncomfortable. This is often when people accelerate. They fill their lives with motion, productivity, noise, not because they're ambitious, but because slowing down feels dangerous. Stillness has a way of exposing things that movement keeps buried. There's a psychological mechanism here that looks like discipline from the outside. Busyness, constant engagement, always doing something useful. But underneath, it's avoidance. A way of never sitting long enough to feel what's been quietly accumulating. Stoic thinkers understood this well. Attention reveals what distraction protects you from seeing. Stillness isn't peace at first. It's confrontation. Like sediment in water. When everything is moving, the water looks clear. When it stops, what was suspended begins to settle. Not because something new appeared, but because nothing is keeping it stirred anymore. This is where anxiety often enters the picture, and it's usually misunderstood. The anxiety that shows up here doesn't feel like fear of a specific threat. It's more diffuse, existential, a tension without a clear object. And because it's uncomfortable, the instinct is to label it as weakness, something to eliminate, something that shouldn't be there. But this kind of anxiety isn't always a signal of danger. Sometimes it's a signal of misalignment. Viktor Frankl observed that meaning often collapses before motivation does. You can still function, still perform, still strive, but the reason beneath the effort has thinned, and when meaning begins to erode, the psyche reacts. Anxiety in this context is not the enemy. It's an alarm. Not because the house is burning, but because something in the wiring no longer matches how the system is being used. The mistake is trying to silence the alarm without checking what it's pointing to. There is a difference between survival anxiety and identity conflict. Survival anxiety wants safety. Identity conflict wants truth. They feel similar in the body, but they move in opposite directions. One contracts, the other insists. And then there is grief again, quieter this time. The grief of becoming someone you never pause to question, of realizing how many small compromises accumulated into a life that feels foreign to inhabit. No single choice betrayed you. That's the hardest part. It was gradual, reasonable, justifiable. Each step made sense at the time. Responsibility and comfort often pull in the same direction. Modern psychology talks about this tension often. The cost of avoidance isn't immediate chaos. It's long-term emotional debt. You see it clearly in careers that succeed financially while collapsing internally. In lives that look stable but feel brittle. In people who say, "it's fine," so often that the phrase loses meaning. Eventually, the illusion begins to crack. And that's usually when fear spikes, because it feels like awareness might destroy everything you've built. But illusion doesn't break randomly. It breaks when it's no longer sustainable. The crack isn't failure. It's re-entry, a return to authorship, not a demand to burn everything down, but an invitation to stop pretending you aren't the one living this life. Like a shell breaking, not to end life, but to allow growth. Nothing is being taken from you here. Something is being handed back, and you may not know yet what to do with it. There is a period that follows the first crack where nothing dramatic happens, and yet everything feels exposed. The structures of your life remain standing, but they no longer feel unquestionable. You move through the same rooms, the same routines, the same conversations, but now there is a thin layer of awareness between you and them. You start noticing how much of your day runs on momentum rather than intention. How often you say yes without checking in. How many decisions feel pre-written. This isn't something you analyze deliberately. It reveals itself in flashes. Small moments where you pause internally and realize you're acting from habit, not choice. That realization carries weight. Not guilt, exactly. More like responsibility waking up after a long sleep. And responsibility, when it's felt honestly, can feel heavy before it feels empowering. You may find yourself slowing down without meaning to, hesitating before responding, feeling less certain about things you used to do automatically. This can look like indecision from the outside, but internally it's something else. It's authorship trying to return. When you've lived for a long time inside borrowed structures, your nervous system adapts to them. It learns their rhythms, their rewards, their limits. Letting go of that familiarity doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like exposure. There's no script here, no clear replacement waiting to step in, and that's often the most unsettling part. You may feel an urge to replace the old structure quickly, to define a new identity, a new plan, a new narrative that explains everything and restores certainty. But doing that too soon often recreates the same dynamic under a different name. What's actually happening now is quieter. Your attention is changing its allegiance. You begin to notice where your energy naturally withdraws. Which environments feel heavier than they used to? Which conversations drain you in a way they didn't before? This isn't judgment, it's sensitivity recalibrating. At the same time, you may notice brief moments of resonance, fleeting, almost easy to dismiss. A conversation that feels unexpectedly real. A thought that lands with unusual clarity. A sense of relief when you imagine not having to maintain certain roles forever. These moments don't demand action. They don't tell you what to do. They simply register as true. And that truth doesn't argue. Fear may rise alongside this. Not the loud kind, but a quiet questioning. What if noticing all this ruins the life you have? What if awareness costs too much? What if stability was better than authenticity? These questions don't need immediate answers. They are part of the transition. The mind tends to frame awareness as a threat because awareness removes plausible deniability. Once you see what no longer fits, continuing as before requires effort. Not because you can't do it, but because you know you're doing it. This is where many people feel the temptation to retreat, to dull the awareness, to stay busy, to numb out just enough to restore comfort. There's nothing dramatic about this. It often looks like getting back on track. But something inside you knows the difference now. You can still function, still perform, still succeed, but it costs more energy than it used to. And that cost is information. It tells you that the alignment has shifted. This doesn't mean you need to make radical changes. It means you need to stop pretending nothing has changed. Those are very different things. As this awareness settles in, there may be a sense of quiet mourning, not for what you lost, but for how long you lived without questioning, for how much of yourself you set aside in order to fit into a life that seemed reasonable at the time. This grief isn't dramatic. It doesn't interrupt your days. It sits underneath them, a tenderness that shows up when you think about certain choices, certain paths taken without reflection. You don't need to punish yourself for this. Most people live this way. It's how adaptation works. But adaptation without reflection eventually leads to estrangement from yourself. And that estrangement is what's ending now. What replaces it doesn't arrive as excitement. It arrives as honesty. A willingness to admit when something no longer feels true, even if you don't yet know what would feel truer instead. This is the uncomfortable middle, the place where illusion has loosened but clarity hasn't formed, where you can't fully go back, but you don't yet see where forward leads. Nothing is required of you here except endurance, the capacity to stay present without rushing to resolve the tension, to allow the discomfort to inform you rather than overwhelm you. You are not losing your life in this phase. You are regaining contact with it, slowly, unevenly, without guarantees. And while it may feel fragile now, this contact is more stable than the numbness that came before, because it's real, because it's yours. What comes next will not be built from urgency. It will be built from coherence. But coherence takes time to gather. For now, the most honest thing you can do is remain where you are. Aware, slightly unsettled, no longer asleep. That in itself is a form of movement.